Special edition of the Helliepod. Because of this new Jordan documentary, everybody is talking about the greatest basketball player of all time. And one of the men on the most wanted list right now is the man who created Air Jordan, Michael Jordan's agent, the greatest agent who's ever lived, in my mind, David Falk, joining us from his house in Bethesda, Maryland. David, you're making the rounds, aren't you?
Yeah, I feel like sort of Austin Powers. I think for the last 10 years, I've sort of been cryogenically frozen. All of a sudden, the doc comes out, and I've got like 8 zillion interview requests. And there's very few things that are more fun to talk about for me than Michael Jordan, because I've learned so much from just being around him for all these years. You know, and as the doc points out to your listeners, his psychological approach to the game. It wasn't his dunking. It wasn't his shooting. It was his mental approach to the game that separated him from any player who ever lived.
Well, and that's one of the things that we've been able to see in this documentary is just how he was just such a unique individual. And I want to get into Michael in just a minute. But first, I want to ask about you. One of the things that we do here on the Helliepod, David, is we talk about people's rookie year. And I've watched so much on you the last couple of days, how you got into the business and going to Syracuse and then GW Law School and then starting with ProServe and literally begging Donald Dell, let me just come in and work for free. And you were a rookie. What would you say was your rookie year as an agent? 74, 75? When did you actually start repping people on your own?
Well, I started working for Dahl on May 25th, 1974, when I was still in law school. He hired me full-time in August of 75. And the first class of clients that I worked with that I had nothing to do with recruiting or negotiating, but I wrote their contracts with the 3 rookies they had in 76. John Lucas, who was the first pick in the draft from Maryland, Wally Walker, who was the 5th pick in the draft from UVA, and Adrian Dantley, who was the 6th pick in the draft from Notre Dame. And I wrote all their contracts as a lawyer. And then the senior guys who didn't want to be involved at all, what they call babysitting, said, look, just take care of these guys. I was just starting out. I was 25 years old. I could recall John Lucas in Houston would call me up and say, I got to get new tires for my car. And I would call 5 different tire merchants in Houston to try to save them, $25 on a tire. Today, you see if you save the guy $200,000 on his Bentley or on his Mercedes. It was all almost more pure back then, because the money was just so different. John Lucas, as the #1 pick in the draft, made $300,000 a year. And for your listeners, watchers, is the answer to the trivia question: who was the last player in the history of basketball signed before the ABA and the NBA merged in 1976? And the answer is John Lucas. So the 2nd pick from Indiana, Scott May, who's the National Player of the Year, he got $100,000, and the money sort of went down. So today, that's less than the minimum. So the whole scale of the business was so different back then. And for me, there was no amount of personal attention that was too small for me. I was living my dream.
When you went into that room to tell Michael about to present to him the various shoe companies, the endorsement opportunities, it's well documented that he didn't want to go with Nike. Adidas and Converse were the 2 big players. He actually didn't even want to go on the trip to the Nike facility to be a part of the presentation. And you leaned on his parents to convince him to go. Was that a call you were dreading making?
No. You mean calling his parents?
Yeah.
No, I'll tell you why. So I just explained how we came to represent Mike. There was no recruiting at all, 0. Dean Smith didn't allow recruiting, nor did John Thompson or Coach K, 0. And so we signed Michael, and I told him on my own, the fact that you signed with us, we have a good track record, Coach Smith recommended us, but it doesn't mean you should trust us. We have to earn your trust. And that will take time, like 2 or 3 years. So with most players, Michael's not the only one, but with most players, I say the same thing with Elton Brand, and his mother Daisy, Malcolm Brogdon and his mother Jan Adams as the vice provost of Morehouse. The first 3 or 4 years, you're making these decisions, and a lot of the things that you're recommending, the players don't either understand or feel comfortable with, and you have to do it like in a family council, and you have to get the parents, they trust their parents on board. And Michael came from an extremely close-knit family. His parents were amazing people. If you ever question why he was so competitive, just meet his parents. Now, obviously, unfortunately, you can't meet his dad, who tragically passed, but you see his mom on the dock. Dolores is a lovely woman. She looks great. She looks exactly the same as she looked.
She doesn't look like she's aged in 30 years.
Yes, and she's really, she's a great motivational speaker. She travels around the world for the various divisions of the U.S. government to give motivational speeches. And so I said to Michael, my very first thing I ever asked of him, I said, look, we're going to meet the companies. I really like Nike. I think Nike is hungry. They're tiny. Nike was a very small company. They probably were a $30 million company in 1984. They weren't that strong in basketball. Converse was the official shoe of the NBA. They had Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Dr. J, Bernard,
Sure.
Isaiah Thomas, Herb Williams, Rolando Blythe. They had everybody. And they were the official shoe of the Olympics. And they were the official shoe of Carolina. But Michael didn't like Converse. He loved Adidas. Ironically, Frank Kregel, who I'd worked with from 1974 till 1983, personally represented the owner of the company that's really called Adidas. So we had a very, very close relationship with Adidas. We had Stan Smith, who's got the leading shoe of all time in tennis with Adidas, Raul Ramirez, Yvonne Lendl. I mean, tons of our clients with Adidas. And the union in tennis, the ATP, was the official clothing of the ATP. But Dassler had died right before Michael came out. And the company was somewhat of a disarray with the family. They were trying to wrestle who was going to control it. And the head of international marketing, John Bolter, came to me and said, David, I know that Michael loves Adidas. I know you want to, take a run at it, but we're just not in a position for the money it's going to cost us to execute the kind of contract that you're going to expect. So we visited with a lot of companies you've never heard of that don't even exist today. One of them was called Hyde Spot Belt, which ironically had a name shoe with an athlete named O.J. Simpson. They had a football shoe called
I remember that company, sure.
Juice Mobiles. It's Saucony. And John Fisher, who owned the company, actually offered Michael more money than any other company that we talked to. But I felt that Nike had the biggest need for Michael and made the resources to market him. And I had a very, very close relationship with the head of marketing for Nike, whose name was Rob Strasser. And so,
was Phil Knight in on that meeting, or was Strasser the one that was doing all the presenting?
Strasser. Phil and I'll come to that. So,
okay.
So, a lot of people question, who induced Michael to go at Nike? Sonny Vaccaro, in his documentary, basically takes full credit. George Raveling, who's a very good friend of mine, who's the assistant coach on Michael's Olympic team, takes credit. And I say those guys were so impactful in recruiting Jordan that they couldn't even get him to visit the campus. He didn't want to get on the plane to go see him. And so I asked his parents, I said, look, Michael can go with whoever he wants to go with. I'm going to make recommendations, but you have to make the final decision. I just want him to see him and hear him. And if he doesn't like him, that's up to him. So Dolores Jordan said to me, David, don't worry, he will be on that. There was no, she said, I'll try to get him on the plane, or a good chance. I said, don't worry, he will be on the plane. So we got on the plane. He was not a happy camper. It's a long trip out to Beaverton. And what I recall of Sonny's role is that we arrived at the airport. Sonny opened the car door and said, welcome to Oregon, Mrs. Jordan. And that was the only thing he said the entire time in the meetings. I have no doubt, Sonny is a very, very, interesting guy. I have no doubt that Sonny had recommended to Nike management that Michael would be a good guy to sign. But that, to me, like if I would have said to Nike in 2003, hey, look, you probably never heard of this guy, so I'm going to make a recommendation. There's a really good high school player that I think has a really good chance to make an impact. You should sign him. His name is LeBron James. Or last year, if I would have said, hey, there's this guy in Durham, a lot of people haven't heard of him, but like, I think he's really going to be a good player. You should take a shot at him. His name is Zion Williamson. Like, Michael was the National Player of the Year as a sophomore.
Right.
So betting him to Nike was not exactly, a sleeper. So we got to Nike. Jordan never cracked a smile. The meeting starts, Strasser's presenting, and they'd done a music video, Dan, of all of Michael's college highlights and his Olympic highlights, and they put songs to the background. They had Jump by the Pointer Sisters, Jump by Van Halen, I Wear My Sunglasses at Night. I can almost remember. Music videos were just starting back then.
Sure.
The best part was Strasser sticks the tape into the machine and he can't get it to work. And he's sitting there.
That's the worst.
20 minutes. Strasser's about 6'3", 350. He looks like John Madden. And he's dripping with sweat. It's like someone had a garden hose on his head and just pouring the water down. And finally, someone helps him come in. They get the video on. And Michael's watching it. The video is amazing. Never cracked a smile. Then we go into the boardroom, and Strasser shows him T-shirts, and hats, and sweatbands, and bags, like what's going to comprise the early line of Air Jordan. Doesn't crack a smile. At the end of the meeting, Phil Knight walks into the corner of the conference room, and Strasser knows, he did his homework, that Michael loves cars. And as he said, and if you come with Nike, and Strasser reaches into his pocket, and Phil Knight knows Strasser's a wild man, he's going to give him the keys to like a Porsche or something. Phil Knight literally is clutching his heart. He has no idea what his wild guy Strasser's going to do. And Strasser pulls out 2 1-inch model cars of Mercedes and said, and it puts them on the table. It was hilarious. So then the meeting finally ends. It took like 3 or 4 hours. We go to dinner. Dinner ends. And I know Michael's really, I think he's going to fire me for making him fly to Portland. And so I say to him, I whisper in his ear, what do you think? And he said to me, this was amazing. I don't want to go anywhere else. You could have blown me away. It was my first introduction to why Michael's going to be a great poker player, because he's 21 years old, never revealed his emotions, never showed he liked it, and he loved it. And he didn't go to any more meetings. So when we went to Converse, I took his dad, James, alone, and we went up to Reading, Massachusetts to visit Converse. He was sold. It was over.
That must have been a real kick in the balls for Converse when you can't even get the player to come to the meeting. I guess they knew at that point that wasn't going to work out.
Well, it wouldn't have mattered if he came, because Converse was the institution back then. Nike needed to do something dramatic to get themselves on the map. They had really good basketball players, but they really didn't have a great shoe back then. And they were a running company. Their heritage was running. Phil was a runner. He loved running. They had signed Ilie Nastase, ironically, in tennis, Jimmy Connors for a year. But they're primarily known as running. And I thought that because they had the greatest need to sign a guy like Jordan, who was nationally known, that they would be the most aggressive in marketing. And I told all the companies, I gave them the famous line from Bobby Kennedy, ask not what America could do for you, but what you could do for America. I said, I know what Michael Jordan can do with a shoe company. And what I want to know is, what are you going to do to promote this young player? So Nike said, what would you like us to do? I said, I'd like you to treat him like he's not a team sport athlete, like he's an individual athlete, golfer, tennis player, boxer, want to have his own line of products, shoes and clothes. And we made them, the best part of his contract, we forced him to spend $1 million promoting him in the first 6 months of 1984.
$1 billion at that time?
$1 million.
$1 million. Oh, $1 million. Gotcha.
Which is enormous back then. Are you kidding me? $1 million was enormous. And the other thing that the doc didn't bring out, how do we do the commercial? So here's the first commercial ever. He signs with Nike. They make the first black and red shoe. And the NBA bans it because it doesn't conform.
That's right, of course.
Uniform colors. So Strasser calls me up in a panic. And he says, God, we're screwed. They're not going to let him wear the shoe. I said, I didn't even know it. He said, what are you talking about? I said, yeah, it doesn't conform to the uniform colors. I said, God, I can't believe it. We're going to do a Band in Boston commercial. And he goes, like, what does that mean? I said, we're going to do a commercial that basically says, this shoe is so amazing that the NBA won't let you wear it. And 5 minutes, we did the commercial, the very first commercial where they show up from head to toe. On October 25th, Nike introduced a new shoe. October 7th, the NBA banned it, and they had the dragnet with the chisel. They said, fortunately, the NBA can't stop you from wearing them. The rest of the commercials, I'd be in Portland. Strauss would take me out for sushi and beer, to have 2 or 3 beers. I would come up with cornball ideas for the commercials. No advertising agency, no, just ourselves. And so the second commercial is him on a playground, and it says Flight 23 is getting ready for takeoff, and the smoke's coming out under the shoes, and goes up in the air and dunks. And they were corny, but
they were memorable is what they were. It's amazing. And that was so, you read Phil Knight's book, and that was so Nike at the time, right? Just to have a couple of guys go out and get sushi and a beer and come up with these ideas that were some of the great ideas in advertising history.
It's funny. I loved Nike back then. I've told this to Phil many times. You have to really admire Phil Knight. I think Nike is one of the great industrial success stories in the 20th century in the United States. And he was obviously the passion and the force behind creating that. And I told Phil about 5 years ago, I said, if Michael had come out in 2004 instead of in 1984, Nike becomes so institutional, they would not have done half the things they agreed to do for him. That's why we put him with him, because they weren't institutional. They were incredibly entrepreneurial. And Strauss was a genius. He really was a genius. And creating the line was very special. So, with all credit to Sonny, I think Sonny's been a driving force in the shoe business. I love George Raveling, who's a really dear friend. They used to be good friends, but they had a falling out. Each of them basically taking full credit for Nike being at Michael being at Nike. As I said, as college coaches, they couldn't even get their recruit to take a campus visit. So I give a lot of credit to Dolores and James Jordan for getting Michael on the plane.
Let me ask you this. Is it true that you offered Nike a chance to nix future endorsement deals for Nike or for Michael with other products if they'd pay him $10 million a year in the 4th year of that first 5-year deal, and they turned it down? So I just want to explain to everybody, this is kind of like, a golfer who, Tiger Woods, for instance, who was with Nike. He doesn't wear a bunch of other insignias on his shirt. It's just Nike. And so that's what it sounds like to me you were giving Nike the chance to do with Michael, is make him more exclusive to Nike, and they turned it down.
Well, exactly right. The reason for that was because Phil, if I'm in Phil Knight's chair and I'm the chairman of Nike and I have this amazing guy, I don't want anyone else to have him.
Right.
I don't want Falk to have him. I don't want McDonald's to have him. I don't want Hanes to have him. I don't want anyone to have them, because every deal you do and you show commercials has the potential to dilute the message that Nike's creating. They lose authorship of the message to a certain extent. And so my job as his marketing manager was to manage this issue, to manage the balance. How much is too much? And so as we started to do his second contract at the end of the 4th year, and 1 year left on the deal, Fred Schreier, who's a really good guy, was negotiating the deal for Nike. And I knew that Phil was very, very concerned with the issue of dilution, because he's a smart guy. And I said, look, if you want to address the issue of dilution. Now, before I get to that, Michael's first deal with Nike was the largest shoe deal in history of basketball. It was $1.4 million a year. So I read people saying, well, for $250, of course he liked Nike. It was $1.4 billion. A portion of it was current, a portion of it was an annuity. And on top of that, he got stock that today is probably worth $50 million. So you can say his first deal was his first deal was over $10 million, but no one knew how big the stock was going to get. And the most important part of the deal was because he had his own line, he was making royalties on the sale of his own products. Nike's expectation is that we were killing it. We hit a grand slam home run at the end of year 3, in the summer between year 3 and year 4, 87, 88, we'd sell 3 million. In year 1, he sold 126 million. So today, if you think about it, guy like LeBron makes a lot of money from Nike. Kobe made a lot of money from Nike. Curry's making a ton of money from Under Armour. Harden's making $13 million a year from Adidas. Jordan sells $3 billion worth of Jordans a year, and it's growing. I think in a few years it'll be $5 billion. Let's suppose he gets a standard royalty, which is 5%. Okay, $3 billion, that's $150 billion. Does it really matter whether his guarantee, which applies against the royalty, 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, it could be $1. And so when I look back, clearly the Jordan relationship with Nike is easily the most successful endorsement relationship in the history of sports. Any sport, any player, anytime. It's the greatest deal I ever did. And at the same time, I oftentimes think it's the worst deal I ever did, because if I had a crystal ball, Dad, and I knew that they were going to sell $100 million worth of product in the first year, I wouldn't have worried about getting a $1.4 million a year. I would have signed for $1 a year and a 50-50 royalty. And when he's selling $3 billion worth of products, he'd be making $1.5 billion.
Right. But how are you going to know that? It's so funny to hear Michael talk about you coming up with the idea of Air Jordan, and he always gets his smile on his face, and he's like, he tried to come up with a few more ideas like that, but who was to know? I mean, that's a once in a lifetime thing. I mean, we will never ever see something like that between an athlete and company happen again.
Ironically, just for historical reasons, I've created 14 shoe brands in the NBA. We created the answer for Allen Iverson with Reebok. We created X marks the spot for Spot Built, who didn't sign Jordan with Spot Built. We created a line for Warner Brothers after we did Space Jam. They had a shoe that eventually that was shepherded by a really smart guy in LA named Steve Jackson, who turned that into Shaq's line. That became Shaq's line down the road. We have a ton of them. Ewing shoe, Patrick Ewing at age 58 this year is still selling shoes and making 7 figures a year for Ewing Athletic. He had his own company. So we've had a lot of shoe lines. Clearly Jordan is singular. I'll tell you an interesting story. One of my dearest friends and clients that I've ever had is Elton Brand. He's like my little brother. He's the GM of the Sixers.
Of course.
I love the guy. He's really smart, just a great friend, great dad, and a great GM. And Michael always teases me because he went to Duke. But so we're doing a deal for him with Nike. I'm out in Indianapolis talking to Lynn Merritt, who's the head of basketball for Nike, who's LeBron's guy, loves LeBron. And they make him an offer, which I think is way below his value. And I said to Lynn, gosh, you're paying a guy in Indiana $1.1 million. Why wouldn't you pay Elton Brand, who's in LA, as much as a guy in Indiana? It's a way bigger market. And so he gets this sort of, cocky attitude, said, really? How many shoes do you think Elton Brand will sell for us? I said, that's easy. 0. What's your next question? And I said, Lynn, there's only one guy in the entire NBA that truly sells shoes. And he goes, who's that, LeBron? And I said, no, blank. His name is Michael Jordan. I'm a big LeBron fan, and he's a great player. I think that if they put Dan Hellie on a pair of Nikes, the way they market the shoes, and they go to Foot Locker and say, if you want Jordans, you got to take 200,000 pairs of Hellies, they take them. They may not sell them, but they'd have to take them. And so I think that if you ask me in the last 50 years, Michael Jordan is an unparalleled universe for selling shoes. If you ask me who the second best seller of shoes, it's a laydown, Allen Iverson. Allen Iverson has the most unique following. He was the first sort of crossover hip hop player in the NBA.
Sure.
He did things his own way. He was sort of like the Frank Sinatra, doing it my way. I love Allen. We represented Allen the first 2 years. We actually have a good relationship today. Very, very interesting person. And he's got a cult following. I don't know why, like Patrick, I think Allen could sell anything today. I think he still is revered in basketball. I think the rest of the players are great at endorsing the brand, the Nike brand.
Hey, David, let me ask you, since you bring up Iverson, he had a really unique deal with Reebok where he had, what was it, 25 million in deferred payments? Did you do that deal?
Yes. He had a rabbi. So this is amazing. Iverson was the first pick in the draft in 1996. He signed the highest shoe contract ever for $60 million with Reebok for 10 years. And Stephon Marbury was the fourth pick, got $400,000 a year from AN1. And a couple of years down the road, he asked us to represent him, thinking that we could press some kind of magical button and get him the money, which we couldn't. But Allen was special, and he had a rabbi trust in his contract that deferred a certain portion of the money and gave him security down the road. But he made a ton of money for Reebok just from his basic deal. He made $6 million a year.
The Jordan deal, the shoe deal, that's, I mean, the most incredible deal in my mind in as we talked about, in sports history for an athlete in a singular company. What was the second best deal, the most lucrative thing that you brought to Michael besides Nike?
I'll tell you the most, I don't know if it's the most lucrative. I'll tell you, this is what I wish the Jordan deal had become. And this happened sort of inadvertently. It wasn't planned. So at about his third year, the NBA started producing videos of the players. And the first two videos they did were Magic and Kareem, two of the greatest players ever, many champions. And I decided it'd be fun to do a video of Michael because his moves were incredible. So I went to Gary Bettman, who's now the commissioner of the NHL, who was running NBA entertainment. And I said, Gary, like to do a deal with Jordan, but I want to do like an old-fashioned movie studio deal where we commit to do 3 videos up front. And I want you to pay him $600,000 guaranteed against a 15% royalty on the sales. I love Gary Bettman, but we had a really good relationship, but we had a contentious relationship because of the roles that we were casted, not because we didn't like each other. So he said to me, gosh, like when you wake up in the morning, do you decide that you're going to be an asshole? That's what he said to me. I was like, how am I being that by asking you for this deal? He said, like, do you even have a concept of how many videos we'd have to sell to cover a guarantee of $600,000? I said, I really don't. Why don't you help me out? He said, we would have to sell 200,000 videos in order to make enough profit just to pay you the 200,000. I said, well, is that a lot in your universe? He goes, well, the 2 leading videos of all time for the NBA, Magic and Kareem. Magic sold 50,000 units and Kareem sold 35,000 units. You're asking us to commit 3 times the combined for those 2 guys. That will never happen. So over the course of the next 6 months, we went back and forth, and we finally made a deal where I reduced the guarantee from 600,000 to 300,000, and he increased the royalty from 15% to 50%.
Oh, wow.
Now, this is a little bit like Nike with the 3 million in sales. How many videos did we sell in the first 5 years?
5 years, let's say 9 million.
4 million. They
4 million.
200,000. We sold, and he made 50%. So he made a ton of money on the video. And listen, I think that everything Michael touched, he had a fragrance with Bijan. We did restaurants, we did car dealerships. I mean, there's a whole empire of businesses that we created for Michael that he deserves. And we sort of got away from simply doing endorsements to owning pieces of the franchise, so to speak.
Were you doing that early on, David, in terms of getting equity stakes in companies as opposed to, a lump sum $500,000 payment, $1 million payment? Were you doing that very early in the process with Michael?
Well, he owned both stock in Nike, and he had an equity in his brand. He had a royalty on it that is equity.
Sure. Yeah.
And we did that from day one. Now, we didn't do that with McDonald's or Coca-Cola. We couldn't. What people find amazing to understand is that Magic had one national deal in his first 5 years in the NBA with 7-Up for 1 year. 1 year. Part of a group campaign with John McEnroe and a bunch of other athletes. Larry Bird had none, Kareem had none, Dr. J had none. People didn't believe that a team sport athlete in basketball could be a spokesman for a national company. So we started Michael out in his marketing program with 3 companies, Coke, McDonald's, and Chevrolet. We had to pound them into submission to sign him for peanuts. His first McDonald's deal was $25,000 in Chicago and $25,000 in North
A
Carolina.
regional deal, correct? It was only regional.
Now, even more amazing, at the end of the 2 years of the deal, the woman who ran North Carolina for marketing did not want to renew the deal because she couldn't understand how she could possibly market Michael Jordan, who's from Wilmington, North Carolina, and played for the University of North Carolina, but is living in Chicago, how she could use him in marketing in Carolina. And after that decision, I think she got transferred to Afghanistan. You know.
I can't, it is so fascinating. I could literally do 5 hours with you just talking about the endorsement deals. I'm going to do a quick ad to pay some bills here.
Can you do the ad?
No, I should have you do the ad. It might be a conflict of interest with Nike and Jordan, though. This is a great company, David, called Viore. It is performance apparel, and I love this stuff. I've been wearing it for a couple of years now, and we are offering you the opportunity to get 20% off. Just go to vioreclothing.com/Helliepod, VUORI clothing.com/Helliepod. Unbelievable shorts. I love the core shorts. They're the most comfortable lined athletic short I promise that you will ever wear. The Ponto pant, they have joggers, they have tremendous workout shirts, and these are crazy soft shirts. They have hoodies. You can wear these for yoga. You can wear this for playing basketball. You can wear it when you go for a jog, and you can wear it to hang out around the house because we're doing a lot of that these days. VioreClothing.com/Helliepod. Get 20% off right now. David, back to you, my friend. I have so many more questions for you that I want to hit on.
Do I get a chance to do an ad for like Brand Jordan?
Yeah, well, this whole thing's an ad for Brand Jordan. What are you talking about?
He doesn't, trust me, he doesn't need my help.
He is doing okay. How often have you talked to him since the documentary has been airing?
A very long talk a couple of weeks ago. He's such a fascinating guy. I read an amazing book called The Second Life of Tiger Woods, written by Michael Bamberger, who I met through a very dear friend of mine in Philly named Jay House. Michael is maybe the #1 golf writer in America. He's written a number of golf books, and it's an incredible insight into Tiger Woods, his comeback from his fall when he won the Masters a year ago. And I called up Michael, who's obviously very close with Tiger, and I said, Mike, you got to read this book. And he said, I'll read it. We got into a long talk about motivation and decision-making. He, this is not intended to be a self-promotion. I want to give you an insight into Michael. If somebody asked the average person on the street, if Michael wanted to pay David a compliment, other than the fact of staying with him his whole career, which is the ultimate compliment, what do you think it would be? People would say, well, he invented Air Jordan, or he made him a lot of money, or he broke through the barriers and marketed him. None of those would remotely register for me. The thing that he said that's the most endearing to me about Michael, they did a documentary on me on ESPN a couple of years ago. It didn't quite get the viewership of The Last Dance.
I watched it.
And the first guy on the doc, it was flattering to me because Michael was on the doc, Patrick Ewing was on the doc, John Thompson was on the doc, David Stern, my idol growing up, Jerry West was on the doc, Elton Brand, Coach K, Greg Monroe. It was amazing. Michael comes on the first scene, and all he says is, David taught me the business. Now, to me, that is the ultimate compliment. And Michael and I had this long discussion about the role of an agent with a star player, with any player, but particularly a star player who's going to be thrust into a lot of important business decisions. And he said that when I was young, he taught me how to make good decisions. For example, the very first decision we ever made, should I give all the rights to Nike for shoes, clothes, hats, bags, sweatbands, accessories, or should we split it up? I gave him the option to do either. Told me make more money in the short run, splitting it up. But if in the possibility we could ever create a brand, which is a long shot, you'll make more money in the long run. Now, that's my philosophy, personally, but it's Michael's decision. And he's so bright and insightful that he understands that athletes today are faced with a lot of very, very important decisions. A lot of them are every day, like what to put on social media. And everything you put on is going to affect how people look at you. It's going to affect your image. And most of them are so coddled by the people around them. And worse than being coddled, people are afraid to tell clients what they really believe because they know they don't want to hear it. And if you tell them something they don't want to hear, they're afraid they're going to get fired. And I think one of the things that bonded Michael and I together, I was very young when we started, I was 33, is that he came to know early on that I was very opinionated, very, very competitive, and that I would always tell him the truth. You know, I wanted him to know, this is what I think. You don't have to listen. You don't have to follow my advice. But if you want to know how I think you should respond to the situation, this is my best recommendation. I think today, very few agents manage their players. I think the players are managing the agents because they're so intimidated to tell a player. I'll give you a great example. Like, I love Zion Williamson. I've never met him. I love the way he handles himself. It's not so much how he plays. It's very exciting to watch play. I've had one or two pretty good players in my career. But
indeed, Zion seems like a great kid, and I've never met him in person. Be very likable, charming guy.
He's humble. He's in tune, you know, with his teammates. He's great. I mean, he's got an amazing personality. I give a lot of credit to his parents for the way he was raised. And I told a lot of my friends, you know, coming out of Duke, he reminds me of Elton Brand. Elton was 285 when he left Duke. And I told him right away, you're not playing 30 games a year, you're playing 100. You know, you got to slim down, or you're just not going to play more than 5 years. And it's hard to tell that to Zion Williamson, who's the talk of the town, the #1 pick in the draft. To me, the first thing you tell Zion is, look, you're going to make a lot of money for a long period of time. Do you want to make $20 million a year for 5 years? Or do you want to make $20 million a year for 20 years or 40 years? You know, you've got to find a way, even though you could play at 280, you know, the torque you're putting on your joints, you're just never going to last. And very, very hard to say that. But if you can't say that to him, then you shouldn't step up to the plate and be his agent, because that's what is required to Matt. If you care about him, you've got to go to the mat and make him understand how important it is.
Difficult conversations between agents and players of that caliber. I can't imagine, and they've only gotten more difficult as the years have progressed. Was it difficult when Michael was playing? I look at some of the numbers, and there's been a lot of talk throughout the documentary about how underpaid Scottie Pippen was, but for much of Michael Jordan's career, he was not earning as much as he should have been. 95-96, David. The 32nd highest paid player in the NBA. He was $50,000 ahead of Chris Dudley and behind guys like Brian Shaw, Clarence Weatherspoon, and Benoit Benjamin. Obviously, the last 2 seasons, he made 30 and 33, which are basically $50 million in today's money. And you knew that was coming, but was it hard to convince Michael that it was for the better good to not be the highest paid player in the NBA for most of his career?
What happened, I think I mentioned this earlier, you know, Donald Dell did his first contract for 7 years. And the minute that he signed that, he was doomed to be underpaid unless he played out the 7-year contract and became a free agent in 1991. In 1991, I signed Patrick for 2 years for $12.2 million a year. Okay, Michael probably would have made 20. But he just literally couldn't go 7 years psychologically, making what Donald negotiated for him as a rookie.
Right.
Michael would have made way more money if his first contract was for 1 year at the minimum.
Sure.
And he became a free agent. He would have.
But of course, nobody's going to do that, right? Of course, nobody's going to do that.
Well, you know, no one's going to do it, but I'll give you a but, okay? So in 1985, when I represented Patrick, I did Patrick's contract, and I made him the highest paid player, not the highest paid rookie, highest paid player in the history of the NBA by 55% more than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, okay? Mm-hmm. And I was so worried that because he signed for 10 years, that the deal would never be in phase with the marketplace for 10 years, that I created something that is commonplace today called an early termination option. I gave the player the option to terminate the contract after 6 years. And we did. And we terminated the contract. We then signed, we tried to terminate. The league said we hadn't met the criteria. We arbitrated and lost and signed an extension for $12.2 million. And so using that benchmark, when Juwan Howard, who was the last class of rookies that ever could negotiate their own contracts, 1994, the next year, the union put in a wage scale. So the first 4 picks of the draft were Glenn Big Dog Robinson, number 1, Jason Kidd, Hall of Fame, number 2, Grant Hill, the one player that got away from me, who I love to death, number 3, and Daniel Marshall, number 4. Juwan was number 5. So Grant Hill and Jason made the All-Star team 6 times the first 9 years. Juwan made it once. At the end of 9 years, Juwan Howard made $47 million more than every player picked ahead of him, or more. $5 million a year, 70% more money than Grant Hill and Jason Kidd.
Right.
And the reason he did that is because he had what Pippen really wanted, but didn't have an agent capable of getting. He had a 12-year contract for $42 million with a right to get out after the second year. And his second year, he made the All-Star team. The rules changed and unrestricted free agency came in. And because his owner, Abe Poland, went out of his way to try to screw Juwan on his rookie contract, because I got to tell you this story. The number 1 pick that year, Glenn Robinson.
Big dog.
Big dog. I had negotiated a deal for Alonzo Mourning the year before, in 94, for $113 million, which I turned down. It was too long. It had some deferred money in it. I told Zoe to wait. He thought I'd lost my mind, but he agreed to wait. So the next year, Dr. Tucker, who's Magic's agent, who's a fun guy, represents Glenn Robinson and asked the Milwaukee Bucks at number 1 to pay him $100 million. Herb Cole, who's a U.S. Senator who owns the team, one of the funniest lines ever, says to Dr. Tucker, let's reverse roles. You pay me $100 million and you could have my entire franchise. And so he paid him 68 for 10. And so that was the environment. The environment was, people wanted long-term deals because they wanted security. And we were setting the market. So Juwan and his negotiations, we represented the Wizards' number 1 pick the year before, who was 6. Juwan was 5, named Calbert Cheney, who was the National Player of the Year. My partner, Michael Higgins, did the deal in 2 hours, got him a six-year deal for $18 million, clean. We asked for Juwan $4,125,000 a year for 6 years. $24,150,000 was the exact number. The Wizards offered him 3 years for $9 million, which is the same money as Cheney for half the amount of years. A year later, and it went number 5. And we had World War III over the contract. I called Abe and said, why are we battling? And the reason we were battling is because Abe was incensed at Big Dog's demand for $100 million. So he comes out publicly and says, I'm going to show the rest of the league the right way to deal with rookies. And he put the clamps down on the Juwan negotiation. And so we sat all summer. He missed the first 7 games. He missed the first 7 games of the regular season. And then we signed him for $42 million for 12 years with an out after 2. I was so angry at Abe for doing that to Juwan, who's one of the most decent men I've ever met. He's classy, he's humble. And I called him in my office once he got back and started playing, was playing well. And I said, Juwan, I should be Italian because I never forget these things. My wife taught me when I was young, don't get mad, just get even. I said, he will pay for embarrassing you publicly. I'm going to make you the first $100 million player in the history of professional sports. And Juwan, being as humble as he is, said, David, I love you to death. I love your passion. I love your loyalty. But if you think that anyone's ever going to pay me $100 a year, you should go to crack rehab. That will never happen. Okay, that was 1994. In the summer of 1996, we signed, Juwan became the first ever $100 million player in the history of professional team sports. He signed for $105 million. And that was my way of saying to Abe Poland, you picked the wrong cowboy to fight with. This is a fight you're not going to win. And it wasn't revenge. Turnaround is fair play. So I then came out publicly because Abe's comment was his justification for fighting Juwan as a rookie was he wanted to show the rest of the league the right way to deal with rookies. And I guess he showed him. We asked for a 6-year deal for $24,150,000 for 6, and his first 6 years he made $54 million. So I guess he really showed him, I'm not going to take that $24 million deal. Give me the $54 million deal.
Well, and then Michael Jordan ends up playing the last couple of years of his career for Abe Poland in Washington. I know that's a whole nother story that I don't want to go down that rabbit hole at this minute, but I do want to ask you, David, what would you have done differently with Michael? Is there anything looking back that you said, man, I wish I would have done this?
Well, you have to understand, we started with Michael with no precedent, with no player to say, let's do it like Magic did it. Let's do it like Bird did it. No one knew that he could do the kinds of things that he ended up doing. And while most of the companies fit together well, for example, Coca-Cola, McDonald's is the largest seller of Coca-Cola products in the world. They fit together. But Coke didn't do a very good job of marketing Michael the first 5 years. And so we switched him to Gatorade, where he was the only athlete that they had endorsing the product. Today, you've got LeBron, you got Dwayne Wade, you had Kevin Garnett, you have a lot of guys. But back then, he was the only one, which I loved. He did it by himself. And so we wanted all the things to be totally integrated. And while they were largely integrated, it wasn't a perfect, seamless integration, where if I knew that we could have got to the point we got to from day one, I would have chosen a certain mix of companies that fit together perfectly, where they could market all the products.
All right. I want to take the focus off money a little bit here with Michael, because I think there are some fascinating stories that are going to come up in the doc, some that have already come up in the doc. After the 88 season, Sam Smith wrote in his book that the Bulls considered trading Jordan to the Clippers for a combination of 5 players or draft choices. How many trade offers were there for Jordan that made you guys actually say, this might work?
Honestly, I know Sam. I think Sam has written a lot of stuff that's supposed to be nonfiction. I'll leave it at that. Jerry Krause, you have to understand, as one of the themes of the doc, Jerry Krause was not a bad guy. He was a difficult guy to deal with because he was incredibly insecure. And his insecurity was heightened by the fact that he inherited Michael Jordan as a player. Rod Thorne, who I admire, respect, and like immensely, one of the really classy executives in NBA history, drafted Michael. And when Jerry Reinsdorf bought the team in '85, he hired Krause and fired Rod. And no matter what Krause did, there's going to be a certain segment of people that say, big deal, you have Michael Jordan, how hard is it to win a championship? And the answer is it's very hard. Since 1980, less than half the franchises in the NBA have won a title. There's 30 teams in 40 years. Less than 15 teams have won. It's not that easy. But Krause went out of his way to take long shots so that he would get the credit. His theory was organizations win, players don't win. And I don't want to ask the pop question of how many championships the organization has won since Michael retired in 1998, 0. And because I love the owner. The owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, is one of the really classy owners in sports, smart, tough, fair, really bright guy. I love the guy. And I think he used Krause as a filter. He used Krause to piss everybody off. So when they went to him as the owner, sort of a court of appeals, they had been marinated by Krause. They were a lot easier to deal with. I wouldn't deal with him. I told Jerry Reinsdorf once, when he begged me to sit down for 2 hours with Krause to do a deal for a rookie, I said, Jerry, in the law, they call that cruel and unusual punishment. Don't ask me to deal with Krause. It's really demeaning to me. And so let me
ask you, David, if this is a fair and accurate statement. And I believe it was from David Halberstam, who was the great author, the late great author. He said, Jerry deserved more credit than he got, but he wanted more credit than he deserved.
Great insight. And you see, look, what I learned, listen, when I started representing Michael, I was 33 years old. I had represented James Worthy. I had represented Phil Ford from North Carolina. I was a junior agent for Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith, who were world-class players. I represented some pretty damn good players. And I was cocky as could be the first few years because we were breaking ground, doing things that no one had ever thought could be done. And people told me they couldn't be done. And after about 3 or 4 years, one day, I sort of had an epiphany. I can't tell you something specific happened. I said, wow, you are really lucky that Michael is as loyal to you as he is. He could have anyone represent him. He could have William Morris, who's the largest Hollywood agency, represent him. He could have Burstyn Marstow, who's the biggest PR agency, represent him. He could have an accounting firm, Price Waterhouse, represent him. He could have the big law firm, Baker and McKenzie, represent him. But he has you represent him, and he's been really loyal to you. Just shut up and stop bragging about all the stuff you've done. Your work speaks for itself. Now, someone should have given that advice to Krause. Krause won 6 rings in his career, okay? The only other 2 people that I'm aware of in that period of time that have 6 rings are Red Auerbach, who's the greatest general manager of all time, and Pat Riley. And I guess perhaps Jerry West, who's my idol, he may have 6. But you're in a very small company. If you never said a word about organizations winning, you just point to your hand, you have 6 rings, speaks for itself. But Krause's insecurity didn't allow him to do that. Now listen, in my career, this is interesting. If I give you an interesting analogy, I don't want to compare myself to Krause, but because of our proximity to Michael Jordan, when Michael first came out and we did the shoe deal, and we did McDonald's, Coca-Cola, we did all these deals that no one had, people basically were saying, David Falk is like Dr. Frankenstein. He's invented this guy in his lab. This special guy could jump and he got a great smile. I didn't invent Michael Jordan. His parents invented Michael Jordan. They did an amazing job of raising him, giving him great values. He went to the University of North Carolina, played for one of the greatest college coaches in history, Dean Smith, who kept him in check and taught him how to play great defense. And we inherited this diamond. And my job was to polish the diamond and make it shine more brightly. It already was a diamond. And that's your role. And so by the end of his career, people basically say, oh, you think Falk's a big deal? My 8-year-old daughter could represent Michael Jordan. You think it's hard when you're Michael Jordan? Now, the truth is, somewhere in between the beginning and the end. I wasn't Dr. Frankenstein. I didn't invent Michael Jordan. And I don't think I was an innocent bystander watching him do everything by himself. We were a great team. And the best thing about being a team with Michael Jordan is I'm sort of like Judd Bushler. I don't have to be a starter. I just have to be on the team. And whether I'm 1% responsible for what happened to him or 50% responsible is irrelevant. We're not dividing up the credit. I'm on the team and it's really working well. And if you're an agent representing Michael Jordan, probably is more honorific than being in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if there'll ever be an agent in the Hall of Fame. It would be an honor, but not as big an honor for me as the fact that from every day that Michael Jordan played professional basketball, he allowed me to represent him. And that's the greatest possible honor if you're an agent in any sport in the world.
The greatest. They throw around the term GOAT far too often, David. And I think there's really only one GOAT in the history of sports, and that obviously has to be Jordan. Just going back to Krause, I don't know if you ever considered any of these, but there must have been a lot of proposals, right? If you're any smart owner in the NBA and you realize that you have somebody like Jerry Krause who's eager to prove that he is more responsible than maybe some people gave him credit for, or he can win without Jordan, there had to be some proposals out there that you guys heard about, or did Jerry not keep those?
I've never heard, honestly, a single trade proposal for Michael. I'll tell you why you really couldn't trade Michael Jordan, okay? In my opinion, if you're Jerry Reinsdorf, forget about Jerry Krause. We're doing a second contract. I told you it took 18 meetings.
Right.
You're dealing with 2 guys named Jerry. So to make it easy, I call Krause Jake, because Krause loved baseball. It's sort of, in my mind, Jake connoted like a guy from rural Mississippi playing catcher in the minors.
Right.
So we're at this one meeting in Florida on the way to spring training for Jerry Reinsdorf. And I'm trying to get Michael $4 million a year. Kareem's second highest paid player in the league, making $2 million a year. And Krause jumps in and gives me like 19 reasons why the Bulls have been successful that have nothing to do with Michael Jordan. From having 6 women that they just hired to take season ticket orders, to Billy McKinney scouring the globe to find talent. And he says, I wonder how much credit do you give us? Gives me like Academy Award, thanking the whole world. I said, Jake, you want how much credit I give you those things? 0 credit. And what else do you want to talk about? And he starts arguing, and Reinsdorf says, Jake, shut up. David's right. He goes, Michael deserves all the credit, but we're not going to pay him $4 million a year. Now, that's what an intelligent person says in negotiations. But I asked Jerry Reinsdorf to pay him $4 million because the season, the attendance at Chicago Stadium went from 6,000 a game to 18,000 a game. The price of parking went up, the concessions went up, the sale of everything Michael touched, he had the Midas touch, turned to gold. And the incremental revenue that he brought to the Bulls alone justified paying whatever he asked for, forgetting how good he was as a player. Now, if you trade him for 15 number 1 draft picks for your whole team, those guys will never produce the revenue that Jordan's going to produce to Jerry Reinsdorf and make his franchise, which he bought for I think he bought it for 16 million. Peanuts.
Wow.
Maybe 13 million. And it's probably worth today $3 billion. A lot of that's due to Reinsdorf's masterful management. A lot of it's due to Michael Jordan. And so Krause probably on his own entertained trading options. I can't imagine Jerry Reinsdorf would have ever approved a trade for Michael Jordan unless he traded him for the entire All-Star team.
Certainly would have made a whole lot of business sense. One more trade story to ask you about, because I just saw this one a short time ago. Before the last season in Chicago, I believe I have the time frame right. This was Scottie was going into the last year of his deal. They had a deal worked out with the Celtics, and like a $60 million deal was on the table, and it was for the 3rd and the 6th pick. The Bulls were going to take Tracy McGrady. They were going to trade Pippen and Luke Longley, but Michael nixed the deal. True story?
I really never heard that. I would say that, Tracy McGrady, who became a great player in his 5th year, averaged less than 9 points a game his first 4 years. So to trade Scottie Pippen, who was a great defender, for Tracy McGrady, who was a great offensive player, Michael might have quit. Michael, as he explained in the doc, not going to play for anybody but Phil. He kept it together as long as he could. And when Krause set in motion a chain of events to undo the team, he basically said, I'm never going to play her anymore. I'm not going to play for anybody but Phil. If you're a coach or an agent and you have a player as loyal as he is, I mean, you can't even begin to thank him enough. I mean, that's one of his great qualities. He's incredibly loyal to people, and he's incredibly respectful to his coaches. So again, I think that the team, in fairness to the team, Pippen had issues with his back, and there were some worries, was he going to be able to last? That's one of the semi-legitimate justifications for breaking up the team that produced the Last Dances. They were worried that Pippen, may not be able to play long-term, and that some of the fringe players were going to have a value on the open market, sort of like Halberstam, that was way disproportional to their value because they'd been on a team. Michael individually raised the value of all those players just by playing with them. And so, I understood that. To me, the most amazing thing of the whole doc is that if you're going to make a decision not to renew Phil Jackson, that's in your prerogative as management. But to announce that before you start the season, and to say that if he goes 82-0, he's not going to come back, would be like saying to say to Simone Biles, okay, she's doing the all around, and in every round she's got a perfect 10. But like saying to Simone, in this last exercise, if you get a 10, we're not going to give you the gold medal. Or like saying to, if you had a sales manager selling ads on the Helliepod, and you said, look, if you come in and triple the revenues that we've had for the last 3 years on the show, just want you know we're not going to renew your contract. It goes against the grain of the basic risk-reward system of capitalism in America. Now, so why would you announce that? And the answer, that is a function of Krause's incredible insecurity. Doesn't make him a bad person, just a very insecure person. And exactly as Halberstam's quote is elegant in its simplicity. He did deserve more credit than he got, and he didn't deserve a fraction of the credit that he sought. And all he had to do was shut up and let the people say, wow, the guy's won 6 rings, must be doing something right.
Yeah, I didn't get that. And it was just simply because I guess it had a lot to do with that Sam Smith book, because he felt like Phil was one of the people who gave Sam a lot of the information that were anonymous quotes in the book. And that kind of soured the relationship from there, from what I understand.
I'll tell you what I think soured the relationship. Okay, so Doug Collins is the coach. Doug Collins is a great coach. He's maybe the best announcer of all time, like play-by-play.
Fantastic.
He's phenomenal. He makes it, you could be a general manager and understand it and you could never watch basketball again and understand it. And I love Doug. I've told him many times, he's so competitive, the pressures of playing, you just stay in the broadcast booth. You're so great at it. And so Michael loved Doug. He hired Doug when he came to Washington. And Doug was doing a great job in Chicago, but Krause fired him for a lot of reasons. One, he wanted to run the triangle, and Doug didn't. Now, maybe that was the right decision, maybe. But so he hired Phil. He didn't hire Pat Riley, didn't hire Greg Popovich, he didn't hire a big name. He hired a guy that he could control completely, his job. He hired him from the Albany Patroons of the Continental Basketball Association, which is the precursor to the G League. And the early part, they had a great relationship because Phil was appreciative for getting the job, and he was once Phil started winning and getting credit because of his unique methods. I mean, he was really into the Zen and the Native American stuff that you see in the doc.
Sure.
Krause wasn't getting the credit he wanted, but Phil was getting the credit. I think that really rankled Krause. And Krause would come in the locker room. Phil didn't want him in the locker room. He wanted that to be the private domain of the players. Once you get inside that cocoon, it's just us as a team. And so a lot of things that happened that created tension between Phil and Jerry. And I think Jerry was very jealous of Phil because, again, as the architect of the team, as the head of the team, he wanted the credit. And first you have Jordan getting the credit. Now he brings in his own guy and he's getting the credit. And that's why I think he let him go. And Jerry Reinsdorf was the one who made the deal to bring him back for the 6th year. And what very few people know is that Jerry Reinsdorf, after the 6th championship, tried to bring him back again. But Krause had so muddied the waters that was a rescue mission that Reinsdorf wasn't able to pull off.
I did not know that. That's fascinating. Couple of getaway questions here. I would be remiss, and they're going to get into this in the ensuing weeks in the doc, if I didn't ask about when Michael stopped playing basketball, when he went to play baseball. What on earth was your reaction, and did you try to talk him out of it?
Okay. So if you understand my relationship with Michael, he loves to tweak you. It's affectionate. He loves to tease you. And like he'll say many times, oh yeah, David definitely came up with Air Jordan. It was the best idea I ever had, and it was the last good idea I ever had. I chuckle at that. I think it's very funny. He's got a great sense of humor, but he likes to tweak it. So when he called me up at home on a Saturday, and he said, like, no introduction, he said, I just want you to know I'm retiring. I know that it was like a knee jerk. He expected me to say, oh God, that's terrible. You can't retire. 17 reasons why. And I fought my natural inclination to say that. Because he's 29 years old, he's the top of his game. He's just won 3 titles. He's the MVP, he's the scoring leader. I mean, he's everything. And I thought for about 30 seconds, and this is exactly what I said to him. I said to Michael, it is the American dream to work really hard at something that you're doing. It could be a vocation or an avocation. To become the best in the world at what you do, to make a lot of money in recognition of your performance. And at that point, you could do whatever the hell you want to do that makes you happy. You've done the first 3 things. You work incredibly hard for many years. You become the greatest basketball player in the world. You made a lot of money. And if playing baseball floats your boat, go for it. Now, ironically, he did play baseball. And Sports Illustrated, that I have every issue back to 1964, wrote a famous story where they blasted him and said he was an embarrassment to baseball. Now, he didn't become Babe Ruth or Derek Jeter, but not having played baseball since the junior high, he worked his ass off and batted 200. I would challenge any Major League Baseball player that hasn't played basketball since the 9th grade to come into the NBA, come into the G League and see if he could average 15 points a game. I'd love to see one guy that's able to do that. You know, the difference, do you read Moneyball?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. What's the difference between, how many hits does it take in a week between a guy who bats 300 and a guy who bats 270?
In a week, it takes 1 or 2 hits almost.
One hit.
Yeah.
So batting 200, not having played baseball since like you're 13 years old, at AA level, it's pretty freaking amazing. Now, do I think if Michael had played baseball throughout high school, maybe into college like Bo Jackson or Dion? Yeah, I think he could have played. Reisdorf said he could play major leagues if he had stuck with it. I think it was amazing. But more than his performance, what was amazing is that take a person who's the best of the world at something, and you ask them, walk away from that comfort level where you're the best. I'm going to put you over here with something you've hardly ever done, where the chances of succeeding are like 1 in 20 or less. You know, you're going to get criticized, you're going to get ridiculed for doing this. And he did it because of the challenge. It was the next challenge for him. He did it because it was a dream his dad had. He was incredibly close with his dad. It took amazing amount of courage to walk away from everything that's become easy for you. Where you have the thing wired the way you want to have it wired, and put yourself in a totally foreign environment. And I give him amazing, for me, watching him in Birmingham was so much fun. It was the purity of sports. No endorsements, very little press, you know. Just
bus rides through small southern towns.
On a luxury tour bus that we negotiated for.
David, when you look at that, it's the biggest conspiracy theory in sports too, right? That because of gambling too much, David Stern said, take a step away. When you hear that, what is your reaction?
I think that I've seen a bunch of Oliver Stone movies, you know, JFK. People, when you get to the top, people love to root for you. And then when you get to the top, then they want to tear you down. They want to find flaws. And everybody wants to be the one to break the story of here's really the reason that Michael retired. Now, he announced at his press conference in '93, at the press conference in Chicago. They asked him, did the media drive you out? And Michael looked at him very sternly and said, I would never let you guys put your foot up my back and push me out the door. I'm doing this on my own. David Stern, on one of the, I don't know, I've seen the first 8 episodes, so I'm not sure what episode it is. David made it clear that he absolutely never disciplined Michael or suspended him for gambling. He wasn't concerned about the gambling. The gambling was a smudge, you know, on a pristine record, because Al Wood, who was Michael's friend from Carolina, set him up with a guy. Al should have screened the guy and know that Michael shouldn't be playing golf with a guy who the FBI is chasing for money laundering. You know, I would, if he knew that the guy had done that, he wouldn't play golf with him. And so it was a mistake. It was a mistake in judgment, but you know, he didn't commit a crime.
Who was the one player that Michael respected the most that might surprise us?
Okay, I would say early on was Walter Davis. When Michael was in Carolina, he loved Walter Davis, who was a 6'6" swing.
Mm-hmm.
He loved Dr. J coming into the pros because of his style. You know, like Michael, Doc is an amazingly articulate man, great voice, soft-spoken, smart, very successful in business. He's my age. I was in the same class in high school. I used to follow him in high school. We played him when I was in college. In high school, Doc was 6'3". He had moves that no one had ever seen, but he was not much of a shooter. He didn't have to be a shooter.
Didn't have to be, sure.
I watched him my junior year at Syracuse. We played him up in UMass. We had a 6'11" center. It was the 3rd round pick of the Portland Trailblazers named Billy Smith. And I think Doc had, I'm going to say 37 and 32. at 6'6" against Billy Smith. Just ate him alive. I couldn't believe it was the same guy. He'd grown 3 or 4 inches, and he was just otherworldly, amazing. So he loved Dr. J. I'd probably say those two. Now, I'll give you a slightly different twist on your question. I asked Michael once, recently, last couple of years, do you ever think how much fun, like sort of like the dream team, it would have been to play with Magic and Bird? And it looked to me like, you know, like I was from the moon. And he said, are you kidding? I would never want to play with Magic and Bird. I wanted to play against them every day and kick their butts. It was a competitive thing. And I'm sure Magic and Bird would have said exactly the same thing. Bird would have. Magic as a point guard, slightly different mentality, might have felt differently. But those are all alpha guys. And they didn't want to band together because you can only have one leader of the pack. And so, you know, he admired a lot of players, but he wanted to, you know, he wanted to set the tone. And that's what you see in the movie. Like, you know, if you had one takeaway from the doc, if I were Siskel and Ebert and I was summarizing the doc, I would say the following. Michael Jordan, having won 3 titles in the NBA in his 20s, takes a year and a half off to play baseball and comes back, I think it was March 13th, 1994. I think it was the date at Market Square Arena. I was at the game. And he's now 31 years old. He knows he's got 4 or 5 prime years left in his career at best, where his athletic skills are going to be at, you know, at a height. And he wants to win as many championships as he can in that very compressed period of time. He's going to take no prisoners, no excuses, no distractions that are going to stand in the way of that goal. He is single-mindedly chasing his own dream of getting his, he's not going to get 11 like Bill Russell had. He's going to get as many as any player in the modern era since Bill Russell, more. And all the mental approach you see, the bullying on the court, the chiding, you know, the cajoling, you know, the interplay with Krause, interplay with Scott Burrell, grabbing Pippen by the singlets and screaming at him to get off the damn bench when he has a headache. And Michael, by the way, has food poisoning in the same game and he scores 38 points, is all because he feels that if he doesn't do this, he's going to allow the other 14 guys to steal a championship right under his nose. And he just can't, not going to put up with that. He may lose it because he's not good enough, but he's not going to let somebody steal it. And so this is his mental approach to motivating, inspiring, intimidating, whatever it takes, because he's got a limited amount of time left to make it work.
Do we see any more David Falk in the rest of the doc?
I haven't seen episodes 9 and 10. You know,
I think they're still being worked on. They're actually still editing the last couple of episodes of the doc as we speak.
You know, it's interesting because there's a certain sort of quiet tension between myself and my former partner, who's Michael's business manager, and the woman I hired to be sort of like his concierge, who has taken on a variety of titles. She hasn't taken on the premier of the world yet, but like image consultant, business manager, agent, whatever, you know, gatekeeper. And, you know, I'm surprised that they let me in the doc, that, you know, that they let like 1 minute of footage in. I know they hate it to acknowledge that all these things happened before she came on board. I mean, every single thing in the doc happened before we hired her because she's sort of like the Russians invented baseball. But Mike Tolan, who's my dear friend, produced the movie, and you know, he clearly wanted to be in the movie, and you know, I'm proud to have worked for Michael, you know, for all those years. Honor, as I said, in my business, it's like getting the Academy Award. If you say you're Michael Jordan's agent, no higher compliment than that. And so I did 4 hours of interviews. I think I'm on screen for like 30 seconds, but I really enjoyed it.
The bald truth, David Falk, one of the most impactful men in NBA history, the most impactful agent in NBA history. I've known him for more than a decade. Always been good to me. David, thank you so much for the time. Much appreciated, my friend.
I really enjoyed it. And I loved it. By the way, as someone who's into branding, I love the name of your show, Helliepod. That's awesome.
I'm working on it, man. I'm taking after you. Maybe I can hire you down the road, but you're semi-retired.
I'm never going to retire, especially after coronavirus. It's sort of like the Air Jordan of podcasts, Helliepod. I love it.
The Air Jordan of podcasts. I'm going to steal that from you.
Because it lifts you up.
Ah, you're the man. David, thank you so much.
It's a lot of fun. Lots of good luck. Stay healthy and stay in touch.